starting. And now we need your slides. Do you remember where they were? Probably in Firefox. Yes. Here we go.
Okay.
All right, on keys.
Does anyone know how, in God's name, I like fully expand the thing on Macs? Sorry, as you'll get to know shortly. Which one?
No, wait. Sorry, you want to do it as display? Go to view. Interval screen.
Whoop. Hey, that works. I have no idea what I'm doing. This isn't like a presentation specific thing. This is just sort of a general existential statement. Life just hits me in the face. So this talk is sort of career advice for people going into sort of data science industry. I say sort of, not because it's not career advice, but because it's all the stuff I wish someone had told me that nobody had. Hopefully that will be useful to other people. Even if it's not useful to other people, it will be delivered in a British accent, so it can't be awful. At worst, it can be like moderately bad, right? So yeah, as you can see, there was a point in writing the slides where I got some amount of bored. So briefly, like who I am. I'm a human-computer interaction researcher, except when I'm a social computing researcher, except when I'm a socio-technical systems researcher, because the field I work in, nobody can quite decide what it's called. It's called whatever the NSF grants we're applying for at the time were called. So it sounds very cool. It sounds like you're dealing with robots. Most of the time, you're not dealing with robots. The people who get to deal with robots work for NASA. I just work in currently information security, which I'm not entirely sure how that happened. I used to be at the Wikimedia Foundation, which is the nonprofit that runs Wikipedia. I was there for about 5 years. I kicked off a lot of their data science stuff, largely by being in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place in the wrong time, depending on whether you're paying attention to like my CV or the number of gray hairs I've accrued. My interests are sort of privacy and ethics and online harassment and how the spaces we occupy shape who we are and how who we are shape those spaces. So this will not be the careers talk that most people give, at least I don't think so, but hopefully it will be valuable for that or valuable despite that. So in the case that you think you might want to go into data science in an industry sense, the first thing you should learn is that it is disturbingly easy most of the time. Like, there are bits that are hard, but not that many. People tend to assume it requires like just mind-blowing amounts of maths and mind-blowing mathematical qualifications. It doesn't in any way. I failed high school maths. This plays very strongly into the imposter syndrome. I don't know what I'm doing. Most of the time, it just requires the ability to sort of logically reason. It helps if you have a stats background or a computer science background or like one of those fields, but it's not a requirement, for better and for worse, depending. It doesn't require machine learning. People tend to assume it does. This is not helped by the common narrative for data science, right? Which is consume massive amounts of data in a big data store and then turn it into something and then apply machine learning to that something. And now we have like a magical algorithm that nobody understands for working out how expensive bread should be or something. Most of the time it doesn't. This is super good for ethical reasons I'll touch on later, but it's also super good because, well, machine learning isn't a fully understood thing. Again, people say it's machine learning a lot. Most of the time, it's not. People say it's machine learning because they think that machine learning is one of those things you can just throw at any problem and the right answer will pop out the end. 99% of the time, this is not true. It's mostly, yeah, like it's analogous to programming. It's 80% Googling weird stuff, and then 20% hoping that nobody finds out that 80% of your job is Googling weird stuff. So yeah, it's mostly logical reasoning. Helps if you come from a science background, not necessary. You just need to like have the ability to sort of think through a thing and have the ability to adapt. Like one of the things that that is either a benefit or a cost is the tools are changing so much constantly, and the job changes so much constantly between what you're expected to do in 1 week or another, that the ability to like adapt and roll with new situations and pick things up very quickly is sort of paramount. And this is one of the reasons that the background you come from is not necessarily the most important thing, because when one of the prerequisites is having to pick stuff up really, really fast, you don't need to be the statistician who ever statsed. Despite this, though, you can do some very, very cool things. It's possible that I'm like a total geek. Well, okay, it's certain that I'm a total geek, but it's possible that me thinking this is a really cool thing is totally geeky, in which case feel free to like nod off or leave or throw things. So myself and a couple of friends accidentally discovered the attention span of human beings on the internet. It wasn't what we were meant to do. It just sort of happened. So my boss came after me one day, and this was when I was working at Wikimedia and I was working for the mobile team. And he just idly asks, how long do people browse Wikipedia for? He later left to go work at a venture capital funded tech startup that makes tools to improve the quality of sex, because sometimes Silicon Valley is exactly as stupid as its parodists say that it is. But so he gave me this question while he was here of like, how long do people browse Wikipedia for? And he was particularly interested because, there are implications for like how many page views we get and like how much people are engaging with the content. But it's actually a really hard question. Like nobody can quite agree on how you'd even measure it. And it's an even harder question because we have a really strong privacy policy that means we basically can't collect anything about users. Like most sites have like, unique identifiers and JavaScript and cookies. Yeah, we don't have that. Last time we tried to, some executive tried to do that, 2 of the analytics engineers quit. I like the team I used to work for. So instead we fall back on logical reasoning. Like what we actually have is a user ID and like a date timestamp. That's it. And what we need to calculate is the time spent on each page. And at the same time, we need to calculate like what a session is. So I read about 30 papers, which was really, really good for getting me to be like an expert in this one very, very specific field within a very specific field within all the way down, but not good for much else because it turned out that, again, nobody agreed. What everyone did agree on was that 15 minutes of inactivity and then you cut and say, like, that's a session, is either absolutely the correct answer that everyone should use all the time or total crap and no better than random. So we sort of worked out, okay, we can add all the time together between each like date timestamp, and then we get the session length, but we need to divide into sessions. Like sometimes people go to work or eat or attend lectures. So we need to be able to identify like when does a user stop browsing. So if we have this like user ID and date time and like the time between events, assuming that users behave pretty consistently, and they do, like individuals do different things, but most people do pretty much the same thing. So people should behave in a pretty consistent way, right? So you should have low value periods between events where people are like browsing between pages, and then high value periods, which represent like the user wandered off to make some hot chocolate or attend a talk for 4 hours and then came back. So all we need to do is, like in an ideal universe, we'll have like these 2 big distributions and there'll be a gap between them, and like we pick that gap, and when you've been like there's been a time period that's elapsed more than that gap, then we cut and we say that was your session. And when we graph it, that's actually pretty much what we see, which isn't something I expected because I'm used to like having nice theories and then gathering the actual data and finding that the data says I'm wrong and stupid and should give up. But it's actually what we saw. We saw these like 2 distributions, one of a lot of the values, which was like in-session browsing, and then one greater than that, which is with the dividing line really being like an hour or so, which is like people coming back to it after having wandered off. So that's not on its own tremendously interesting, but human-computer interaction is about 5 people wide. So I knew a load of researchers who it turned out had also been studying this thing. And I ran into them at the pub because because it's academia, and found that they'd seen like the same like log normal distribution with reading Wikipedia and editing Wikipedia and playing League of Legends and answering or asking questions on Stack Overflow. And even, does anyone remember in about 2001, AOL leaked a load of logs? They didn't mean to leak it. They meant it to be like a happy-go-lucky public data release. They just didn't realize that people would search for like private information, which seems like the stupidest assumption that anyone has ever made. Nobody's allowed to have those logs. So I do, because literally everyone in the field has them while pretending that they don't. And we saw the same. Well, I did, and help. Is it shift? Should like specifically shift, not just like. For people on the webcast, technology.
Question, Valerie.
Yes.
Is this all desktop or are you including mobile?
So the answer was specifically to look at mobile, and we looked separately at mobile web, mobile app, and desktop readers, and found the same pattern with all of them. The actual results changes. The
It
one
just shifts over.
Yeah, exactly. It shifts over, and of course, like the values we get when we apply that cutoff threshold to the data set changes. But the actual like distribution and the divide up is pretty much identical. It's good to know that, like, if nothing else, I can break technology effectively. Yeah, but my theory is more fun.
That's frustrating.
Should I just like start talking? Unfortunately, there are a load of memes in this,
We
which
could do halftime questions.
Yeah.
That's the best I got. This is decided to turn itself off and is not paying attention to me.
oh dear.
What was the answer?
Oh, so how long people spend reading before they get bored and wander off? Oh,
Who has
Kind
the
of.
biggest laptop screen here?
Okay, now try to hold on. Wait. This is the fastest, easiest way to kick it.
I mean, it's timing down, but I imagine that's to turning off.
What's gonna happen?
Is that good? How on earth is this my job? Yay, we're back. So the answer is about 7 minutes. Don't know why, about 7 minutes. It's 430 seconds, which is kind of depressing because if it was 420 seconds, that would give me a lot better an idea as to why people were getting distracted and wandering off. But it actually got written up into a paper because we'd seen this thing in lots of data sets, and that's kind of cool. And we had this new methodology, which people didn't really have, and a new way. So we wrote it up for WWW, which is the International Conference on the World Wide Web, 2015, which it's a journal that was founded by some bloke called Tim, is how I always describe it to people. My bosses were happy. It made its way into the work of a Hugo Award-winning novelist, which is one of my strangest stories, and like grabbed me afterwards for it. And the closest thing to like difficult maths was, oh, that's a log normal distribution. So we probably shouldn't just use the arithmetic mean on that. Most of the time it was just logical reasoning and then writing a load of code with like dummy data sets and then seeing if it did the thing on the dummy data set that we expect it to and adjusting otherwise. It then actually got turned into an R package, which was nice. It's called Reconstructor, and it's written with a C++ backend, and so it happily turns 20 million events into a series of assessments of session length and time on page in 2 seconds. Yeah, sounds about right. I got bored. It's okay, nobody has.
No, I'm going to install it.
Oh, well, great. And start on GitHub. Another reason that data science is great, the pay is really good. This sounds stupid, but actually, like people, there's a phrase attributed to F.E. Smith, a British lawyer, which was that he found that the best cure for like communism was the sudden inheritance of a large bequest. I myself loathe capitalism with every fiber of my being, but I recognize that I exist within the system and that I have, things like student loans to pay and plane tickets to fly to Seattle, to take the train to Vancouver, to talk to people and all the rest. And the fact of the matter is that the idea of like money can't buy you love and like just do what you like want to do and do what you dream of. It's nice when you can combine what you want to do and like making rent in the same thing. And in the ideal world, everyone would be able to, but in the real world, it is sometimes nice to be able to afford things, at least while we're in like the interval of recognizing that everything is kind of screwed up economically and actually doing something about it. And it's not like you can't make a difference and you can't contribute to public good. There are a lot of companies that are nonprofits that do a lot of awesome stuff. I just came out of one where I was there for 5 years, perfectly happy. Well, okay, 3.5 years perfectly happily, and 18 months of like untold misery. And there are for-profits where they're for-profits, but they're still interested in like doing something bigger than themselves, giving back, be that through open source, through data releases, through actually targeting their products to help in situations where people are losing out and they can make a difference. So it's nice, it's all. So if, having heard this, you've not been terribly put off the concept of doing a job in data science, you might want to apply for a job. And there are certain things that you'll be told that you should care about that you should not. So warning of this is, I am a tremendously privileged human being. I'm cis, I'm white, I'm male presenting, I'm straight presenting. Like, I'm so white, I listen to hip hop, which for a white person marks you as really, really white.
What is cis?
Cis means that the gender you were assigned at birth matches the gender that you have.
Oh, okay.
No problem.
I've heard that acronym before.
It's not an acronym, it's a Greek shortening, but yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, it's just like instead as opposed to trans.
got it. Thank you.
So all of my experiences and the advice I give are colored through these lenses. When I'm saying, here are the things that you should make you run out of the door of a company and like set fire to it on your way out if you see them, interpret them with the fact that the person saying this is someone who has the freedom to run out of a company and set fire to it and not be immediately blacklisted from like all possible places of opportunity. So with that in mind, the first thing you will hear a lot about is the concept of a data unicorn. And it will normally involve someone presenting a picture that looks like this. It will have much higher production values because it will be created by someone with like a graphics design team rather than me in Google Draw at 9 in the evening last week. But it'll look something like this. It'll make out that to be involved in data science, you have to be some like Renaissance person who understands software engineering perfectly and understands statistics perfectly, and then there's always a third circle, and what's actually in it varies. It could be anything. It could be like setting up servers. It could be the expectation that like if there's no data, you must go out and you must mine the data from the data mines, for 12 hours at a time without breathing protection until you get black lung and fall over.
My all-time favorite one is one that posted, you need to know random forest neural nets and machine learning. Thanks.
Excellent. These diagrams are normally put around by people with like self-described LinkedIn profiles of like thought leader, businessman, husband. And so Rich's joke, there are lawyers in the room. So I used to be a lawyer. Please don't throw stuff. So with my lawyer hat on, I cannot tell you, I explicitly cannot condone filling a sock with a pile of toonies, and every time you see someone display a graph like this unironically, hit them with it until the stupid falls off. However, I'm also a languages nerd, and as a languages nerd, I can tell you that condone is a class of word known as a contronym or a Janus word. It's a word that means like something and also its opposite, right? So condone means both, in this context, I can't say that you should do this, and I can't say that you shouldn't do this. So I'll leave the interpretation up to the listener. This is total horseshit. I've been a scientist in the tech sector specifically, but like in private industry generally, both non-profit and for-profit. And I've heard a lot of people I've seen a lot of people put up like big, must be a unicorn and you must do these 15 things posters. And nobody actually wants that. Anyone who does want that is clearly an idiot. And if you can do anything in life, it is avoid working for an idiot. Ultimately, people want someone who's adaptable. Just like I said, it's okay if you don't know these 150 things. 80 of the 150 things you will never have to do. 10 of the 150 things you come in learning, and the remainder you can probably pick up as and when you need them and don't need to come in front loaded with like, you know, not only can I manipulate random forests, I can also set up like big puppetized suites of servers to run your entire web platform. These people don't exist, so nobody actually hires them, however much they wander around saying, yes, you must be perfect at all of these things. So please don't like burn yourself out or turn away from the industry for the simple reason that you feel like you've only got 100 of the 101 things that this blog post on some crappy internet site says every data scientist must know. Not I'm thinking of anywhere in particular. Anyway, you'll also hear a lot of commentary about how great unpaid internships are. I love these. I love these so much. In fact, I actually went to, well, I didn't go to, one of my friends went to a presentation where someone was like, unpaid internships are good. If you can do unpaid internships, you should. Unpaid internships are terrible. If you can avoid doing them, please do so. If you want to go somewhere where you don't get paid but still get living expenses and are told that this is okay because you will learn stuff, go to college. It's a lot like an unpaid internship, except you actually get a certificate at the end. Anything people are actually giving out an internship for, if you're providing value, they should be giving you money for it. That's how capitalism works. And if they're not, either they're trying to get something free, in which case don't give it to them, or the job you're doing isn't actually providing value, in which case what's the point of doing it? Why would you waste, like, you know, 1 month to 12 months of the limited time you have on this earth doing something where even the person asking you to do it doesn't think it's worthwhile? You also get a lot of commentary about how you need to dress professionally and aren't allowed to have any tattoos. I will point out that I've been employed in data science for 6 years now. I have an Erdos number of 5, and I will leave it as an exercise to the viewer to identify whether having tattoos is a blocker to being successful in this field. I get very het up about lots of rules about you must do X and must do Y to do this jobs in this field that basically amount to exclusionary bullshit policies for things that don't matter or affect your ability to do the job. So if I'm sounding angry, it's because I am. Things you should care about. First, look for a company that actually cares about the result. Sorry, mental script skipped ahead of slides. I said this. Things to actually care about. So the first is around inclusivity and progression. If the staff all look like me and you have the opportunity to run and go somewhere else, do so. One exception, if the staff have fantastic nails, then you should absolutely stay, because having someone who knows where you can get a decent mani-pedi wherever you're working is priceless. And if any of you are ever in Seattle, you want nice nails, it's right by UW and it's great. If the HR department is discussed as if they're not actually a thing, like they're demand randomly to distribute tax paperwork, run away. If there aren't any clear and explicit behavioral policies about what is allowed in a workplace environment, what isn't allowed in a workplace environment, and if there isn't an actual enforcement mechanism for these things that's spelled out, not just like, oh, you're not allowed to like harass or abuse your coworkers, but, and if you are, here is what, if, you know, so you see someone doing this, here is who you report it to, and here is what happens, and here are the penalties available. If this doesn't exist, do not go there. If nobody can point to an org's promotion charts, and so if they're just going to, like, if you're too loud or too disruptive or not a culture fit, they're just going to keep you in the same job for like a decade while you drop your telomere count but don't raise your salary, get out. These are strange sounding things because when you're like actually in the environment, they feel like asides, right? Because it's not the job. None of these things are the job, but what they are things that govern whether you're likely to be surrounded by coworkers who bring a diverse range of perspectives, or whether you're going to be stuck in a place where actually working there and dealing with people is tantamount to abuse. The support you get is important. Outside of the minimum level, like setting up policies and everything else and knowing who to go to, are you answering someone who sees value in data? Are you there because they think you're going to do cool work and they're interested in the results you produce? Or are you there because, well, they went to a LinkedIn seminar last week that said that every company had data scientists these days and so put out a job ad? Are there actual benefits? And by that, I don't mean free snacks to take the edge off working the weekend, right? So this is an interesting thing. What benefits look like in a good world is like they support you when you need to go vote. They support you around healthcare. They support you around pensions. What benefits look like too often is they give you a universal leave policy where you can take as much, because they know that what that means in practice is that nobody will take any because they'll feel like they're letting their coworkers down. And also it means that when you quit, they don't have to give you an accumulation of leave as pay. They make sure that you have cooking on site and that you have laundry on site, not because they care, right? But because if all the things that you have to do aside from your job, you can do without leaving the office, you never have to leave the office. So pay attention to that. See if you're getting into a situation where it's pretty clear they're trying to set it up to be abused. Do more experienced colleagues treat ignorance as like a teachable moment or something to ridicule? This is super important, and it's so somewhere that does it well. This is like my moment of happiness and enthusiasm, right? As appropriate. At my old job, I had the analytics engineering team I worked really, really closely with, and I adored working with them. And the reason for that was that whenever they'd mention a technology or like a system that I didn't know how to deal with or like hadn't encountered before, I'd say like, what's X? And they'd get super excited. And they'd explain to me what X is, because their attitude was, X brings me a lot of joy. If I explain it to you, it can bring you a lot of joy too. And then this person I work with is happier. And that's a really valuable thing when you encounter it, but it isn't universal. A lot of people have this approach where it's like, there's a pecking order system almost, and there's like this implicit social hierarchy, and the only way for me to rise is for you to feel lesser. And there's a load of insecurity and imposter syndrome as well. And one of the side effects of that, when you combine it with sort of hypermasculine aggression and like the general fragile masculinity, is this idea of like, if I treat you with contempt and ridicule for not knowing this thing that I know, then I feel more secure in my place. So that's an important thing to see. It's hard to scope out in advance, but if you can, do so. And if you can't, and you see when you're inside the organization that there are people who are scared of asking for help, that's a bad sign. Do conversations about data and software include respect for users' rights? Fairly self-explanatory. The stuff you're doing isn't meaningless, right? Whether you attach a unique ID to every request to the server so that you have this reading list effectively for each unique user that the FBI can just come around and be like, I'll take that. That's important. Whether you do these things or not is important. And those are conversations that the team should be having. And if they're not having those conversations, if questions around like ethics and like the actual user's point of view aren't centered in the narratives that they have around how they develop products or how they do research, it's a good indication that they're not actually that interested in providing benefit to the user. Providing benefit to the user is just a convenient vehicle through which they can churn out money. And again, making money is nice, but if you can find a place where you can do good as well, that's nicer. And then finally, salary negotiations, because this is a fun one. people are going to try and get away with paying as little as possible. Capitalism is terrible. If they can get 110,000, say, assigned for a job, right? And then they can find someone who's just out of school and doesn't know how much they're worth because they're just out of school, and pay them half of that and keep the other half in their team's budget to use on other stuff, like ski weekends, they will. So this is really important. First thing to remember is work out what you need to live on and never go lower than that. I'll be honest and say that if you're working, even with Vancouver's housing prices, and oh my God, what the hell is going on in this city? If you're working particularly in the tech field, there shouldn't actually be a situation where this is a concern, for the simple reason that tech is just like hideously paid generally. But it can happen, particularly in non-technical roles, and it can happen a lot in non-tech fields. Never go lower than the amount you need to live on, not even if the job looks like it would provide the company assures you that in 11 months and 29 days, just before they're eligible to give you unemployment benefits if they fire you, they'll promote you to this job that does make a livable wage. Never go below that level. Do your research. Places like Glassdoor are super helpful. They're not so great with like small to medium-sized companies for the simple reason to provide reviews, but with big companies they're really, really helpful because you can look at what people in the same job or industry or company are making in similar roles with similar levels of experience. So you can go in knowing like this is about the range they should be giving me as someone who's in this field, in this role, this much experience. Don't let them turn the conversation into what you want, because you may not know. I still don't know how much I'm worth. It's very contingent on like where I'm working and who I'm working for. There's this trick that they use a lot where they're like, so you know, tell me how much you think you're worth, or like, tell me what you'd like to be making. Because then if it's higher than the amount they got budgeted, they can now, you know, negotiate you down. And if it's the lower, they're just like, oh, that sounds fine. Yeah, I think we can work with that. And then again, pocket the extra ski trips. So don't let them turn it around like that. Rephrase it as how much do they think you're worth? Because that's ultimately what the conversation is, right? You're giving them your labor. It's not about your sense of self-value. The fact that they're interested indicates that it's about their sense of value. A big caveat to remember with all of this, though, is see the comment on privilege above about the ability to like walk out and flip the bird at the building as I go away. So there are a lot of studies that show the salary negotiations specifically, but negotiations generally are harder for women in general and African-American women in particular, for that stereotyping is a thing that exists. Like, so has anyone seen the study that when women occupy 25% of the conversational space, men in the conversation assume they're dominating it? It's a fun study for given values of fun. It's a similar problem. So basically, if a man negotiates, then he's like confident and a go-getter. And if a woman negotiates, then she's disruptive and aggressive.
How many times, like, you know, like if you ask any group of women who worked in the industry for a while, how many of them have gotten a performance review that says this person is too aggressive, you know, speaks up too much in meetings? They all have this. We all have it.
Yeah.
It's universal.
For people who don't know Daisy, Daisy worked at is a badass software engineer and worked at Apple for an extended period of time in the noughties. But from everything I've heard and seen, it is exactly the same. I don't mean to just be like depressing the hell out of everyone. I'm just trying to give a very honest thing of you will get to do awesome stuff, but you should bear this stuff in mind. So yeah, like that differing standard of like, you know, men are confident and like they're forward thinking and women are aggressive and disruptive. That isn't just for performance reviews. It can happen in salary negotiations as well. And so that's a thing to bear in mind, particularly if you are people who, again, don't look like me. So the actual applicability of this may vary.
It works pretty well.
Fair. But so all of that aside, imagine that the first bit didn't make you bored and the second bit didn't even make you run screaming, and you actually get a job in data science. You should try and avoid basically turning into a cut-price Darth Vader, which is harder than it sounds. So here's Cautionary City, because pretty much every cautionary tale I've ever had startups in New York City because I hate New York. And no experience I've had there has ever convinced me that my opinion is wrong. So I was at this conference in New York. It was I think it was just like the New York City R meetup or something. It was this big mashup of interesting R programmers and not so interesting startups. And one of the not so interesting startups was a human resources analytics company, and they did like a recruiting pitch, right? For like, oh, you should come work with us. Recruiting pitch, I should say. And I hope that one of them is listening to this because it was atrocious. It was an R conference, and they opened with saying, actually, we do all our work in Python. That was how they opened. But so they were trying to think of examples of like cool work they'd done, right? And so one of the examples they came up with was that they'd been called in by Google to assess Google's childcare program, because they'd introduced a childcare program where they actually had like creches on site and support, and it had got full, so they'd expanded it, so it got full again, so they'd expanded it, and eventually some exec's kid couldn't get in for the day, and at that point it became a problem in a contracting company for, right? So this HR analytics company took all of the data on Google and Googlers and worked out, based on, you know, the number of Googlers that had kids, the timeline of when they'd been having kids, and like the rate it had been accelerating, and how many people they were planning on hiring, exactly how many kids they were likely to have in like a future time period as a company, and then like what the cost of this would be, and then presented it to Google, and then Google canceled the childcare program. Google has a childcare coupon program whereby you can now get discounted childcare outside the company. Oh, cool. In that case, maybe they just sized it. I don't know. That would sound very tech, actually, just like quietly fired. But yeah, so they just closed with like pretty cool, right? Which wasn't pretty cool. Like active data science to remove things that lower the barriers to admission for marginalized groups in industries, not actually that cool. Spoiler. But this is what some companies do, right? You can use data science to do really cool stuff. You can also use it to do really nasty stuff. The next example is not up on the slides because I don't want to give the world as a whole ideas. But basically, I was building a tool to localize timestamps based on the user's location, which is really, really disconcertingly easy. And I thought it'd be really cool because then I could work out, like, you know, you could look at like when are people actually browsing on mobile and desktop in their actual time zones, and you can see really cool patterns that match what you'd expect people to be doing, but you can see it in the server-side data. So you can see like at midday, mobile just gets this spike as everyone goes out for lunch. Ditto at like 5 to 6 p.m. as everyone's traveling home on the bus and they don't have their laptops. Really cool, except I worked out afterwards, because I was looking at this data and there were some anomalous patterns in some of the traces, where just like consistently activity would just decrease or stop in particular locations or in particular countries. And I worked out that what I'd actually managed to do as a side effect was build a tool that, using publicly available data, could identify any Muslim or Jewish Wikipedia user, regardless of their level of anonymity, who had an account. And that's kind of creepy on like 150 different levels. So I immediately trashed the project, and this is why it's not written in the slides. Easy to do stuff where you look at it and you go, oh my God, I'm a monster. I was trying to answer a legitimate scientific question and now I'm a monster. So yeah, data science doesn't really have a core set of ethical guidelines, right? So statistics does, because statistics has like the ASA down south, and they have ethical guidelines, which, one of my favorite things, includes provisions for being nice to cats and dogs, which a big thumbs up to whoever wrote those guidelines, because they have exactly the right priorities if they're including puppies. And, you know, human biology there was the big report in the 70s. And so since then, you've got like a series of ethical guidelines that control things. Data science has nothing. There's the Data Science Association, but nobody is actually a member of the DSA. In fact, I only found it while Googling to find all the examples of data science ethics guidelines. Like I'd never even heard of them. They're also mostly managers. Their code of conduct involves Hammurabi risk management. And I don't know what this is, but I'm pretty sure that if the work you're doing carries a risk of turning you into a like king of Babylonia, you should probably revisit the basic principles. So there aren't really these industry guidelines in the same way that there might be field guidelines in science, and that's a problem, because it means that what you have to do is basically think of some like general principles and then communicate those principles out of like turning into a horrible human being by accident. This is part of my motivation for the talk, is wandering around being like, you want to get involved in data science? Great, please don't turn into Darth Vader. So the first thing to do is ask what the implications are, right, of your research. So obviously you're not doing something that is completely illegitimate and completely horrifyingly unethical. Otherwise, I would hope you would have noticed. But just because you're doing something legitimate, like finding out when mobile users browse on Wikipedia, doesn't mean it can't be used for something really, really horrific, like finding out where all the Muslims live and what they're doing. Sometimes, as a side effect of your work, even if it's not like an implication of the work you're doing, it's just like there's a stepping stone to the thing you're doing, and like that has stuff, you're going to find out that you've accidentally discovered how to measure stuff. Do you report, oh, by the way, I've worked out how to measure this stuff, particularly when, however horrific it is, it might actually be useful for a given value of useful in like, you know, making this quarter's profits jump a little bit higher. To my knowledge, if the first time that my bosses will know that I accidentally worked out how to identify all the Muslims on Wikipedia is if they listen to this recording, and I'm perfectly happy with that. Don't abstract away too far, which I always mentally try and like hear that to follow the meter of the Hamilton song My Shot, just because I've been listening to Hamilton enough that don't, you know, do not or I am not follows that, but it doesn't quite mesh. Data science, all science, in fact, is about abstracting away, right? We have this big complex system of people, or of rocks, or of data sets, or of horrible R packages for dealing with encryption. Like we have this big ecosystem of things that are really hard to model because they're complex, and chaos theory is, you know, an actual thing. Abstract away a layer, right? First, we're just going to take the metadata from the people or the rocks or the packages, and then we're going to aggregate that metadata from the people or rocks or packages, and then we've got something we can actually reason about with maths, and that's awesome because we can make decisions with those things, and it's great, except when you forget that there are still ultimately real people, packages, or rocks that data represents, and that the decision you make will impact, right? An algorithm based on data is great, but algorithms don't know that redlining is a thing. Algorithms assume that like the input data is non-biased to start with, or at least that someone had the smart idea of controlling for that input bias, and a lot of times they didn't. So ultimately, you need to make very, very sure that however much you abstract away, however much abstracting away is necessary to do the job, you remember that there are ultimately people at the source of the data, and it is those same people who will be impacted by the things you do. Because otherwise you get a space where it is totally ethical for data scientists to go work for the US government building algorithms for drone warfare that when they go wrong kill thousands of people, and we don't have a problem with brushing shoulders with them at conferences. And they don't have a problem with the quality of the work they've done. And this is an issue. There's an epistemological rant that goes here, but frankly, people may be bored, so I can just skip it. That's after the rant, that's all I've got. So does anyone want the rant, or should I just like cut to questions? Short, compressed rant. Statistics is the science of the state, etymologically and practically. The scientific method itself is heavily biased towards certain types of data and towards certain types of people providing scientific knowledge and away from others. Like, it's not like when you step into data science and when you step into statistics, you step into this perfectly neutral space that can be used for both great good and great evil. It's actually biased towards like, not great evil, but like marginal evil, or at least not giving a shit about whether it's evil. This is something to be aware of, right? It's worth being aware of the fact that statistics and quantitative data, by definition, is a field that undervalues the perspectives of, like, it undervalues lived experiences, or undervalues the perspectives of groups that are small enough that they don't meet the sample cutoff. If you remember these things. Again, it's not like it'll stop you from screwing up sometimes. Everyone screws up sometimes, but it will at least make it easier to avoid those screw ups and to learn things from them when they happen. There you go. Very short rant. And that's all I've got. Anyone got any questions? Nope.
Questions for Oliver? Jenny?
So I appreciate all your advice about workplaces to go into and not go into.
Yep.
I'm wondering, so companies plan to align, right? And so you find yourself in a place where you still have some things to deal with. So I was wondering, like, which points there have you had the most success with, like, managing upwards, like,
And like,
causing your environment or the people around you to change? Because sometimes they
yeah. I mean, so it depends on who you are, is the thing, right? Like, so I have had some success pushing on issues around, we had actual guidelines on what you can and can't do, and it would be nice if people weren't creepy all the time. But I've also seen a lot of studies that show that actually, like, women and minorities get pushback for making exactly that same argument. So from where I am, I would recommend that, like, the pay is, again, if it's above the what you can live on, the pay is the most secondary thing and the environment is the foremost. And there are some things where you can just, in some ways, not brush them off, but recognize them and deal with them and move on. Like, you know, if the benefits are in fact free snacks, well, free snacks aren't bad. They're like a cultural warning sign, but they're not bad. On the other hand, if there's no promotion behavioral guidelines and, like, nobody is quite sure who runs anything when an employee screws up, that's a much bigger thing to deal with. That's probably, like, the most critical thing to make sure you have in place. And the test I always use is, if I encounter a company where they don't have a good answer to questions around that, is what is their reaction to giving suggestions about how they might do better? If it is defensive, bad sign. If it is, I hadn't thought about it that way, and they sort of walk off looking slightly concussed, better sign. So yeah, the issues around HR and employee behavior and promotion are probably the biggest things to pay attention to. Yeah.
Tiffany?
What are your best ways, like, for advice for people looking for jobs, what are your best ways of sussing out the culture?
So part of it, and this is a problem because of how it biases things, you know, part of it is built around networking. It's definitely easiest if you know someone who already works at the company. Obviously, the problem there is, like, a lot of companies tend to be monocultures, particularly in tech. And so if you're someone coming from other than mine, that networking with these people may not be possible because they, you know, if they occupy a sort of constrained network that's fairly self-contained. The thing I've come to use a lot more than just the friends, right? Because by definition, friends who work for the company, like, to some degree working for the company, is Glassdoor. It's not the best site, but it's really kind of interesting because, like, it's biased, right? Because most of the time it's former employees who left because they had a problem with things. So you can't just look at it and go, okay, these people say that the company has, like, no functional management. Clearly the company has no functional management. I'm out. Because it might mean they didn't let them rewrite the entire application in Node.js because they thought it would make a really cool project. And clearly that means the management doesn't know what they're doing. But what you can do is take the, like, common points of, like, management is bad, or everything's gone a bit crazy since the IPO and, like, it's lost that startup vibe, / it hasn't lost that startup vibe and it's bad. And you can take these things, and when you go into the interview process, you can, like, bring them up of, like, so I heard that XYZ, like, do you have anything to say about that? And again, see, do they get defensive? Do they have a good answer? Does it feel like a rehearsed answer or a genuine answer? You sort of progress with that. It's not entirely foolproof. Like, information entropy is a thing, but it works better than going in blind. And yeah. Yes.
Personal experience. I would say that all those things, and also if they seem their suggestions, like, they actually are actively feeding back to you about those suggestions, I think that would be a good sign. You know, as, like, so you can tell that during an interview. Also, if those people who are interviewing you do not seem excited about their jobs, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Which is also noticeable in an interview. You can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you don't want people who are pushing you, like basically seeming like they're trying to interrogate you to see what you know. They should be interested in what you know because they can learn something from it, right?
One other thing I do is try to find people that have no vested interest in you being hired. So maybe not exactly the team you're going to be working on or something, and ask them how they like it, because they usually get honest answers. It's the grad school equivalent of like, ask the students, not the professors, because they'll give you an honest answer.
Yeah. Cool.
More questions? Back here.
So you're talking about the whole ethical thing. And when you find something, well, it's bad stuff, right? And then you were talking about, do you report it? You didn't really address that.
Oh, like in
There's good reason to do it.
I'd say it depends on the situation, largely. Like, reporting it can be great, because reporting it means that if you have a good boss who is like shares these concerns, reporting it can be great, because then your boss knows that like this is a thing that we probably shouldn't pursue, and like factor this into like whatever plan you're presenting. If you have a bad boss or an unknown boss where like they're not bad people, they might be great people. Like they might, like you might go for a non-alcoholic or alcoholic beverage with them at the end of the workday every Friday. They might be perfectly lovely and have 2 kids who they adore a lot, but they just don't think about these questions beyond like, oh, that'll look really good in the quarterly report. That's when you burn it with fire and don't tell anyone. I appreciate the advice I'm giving may get me in trouble, but I'm hoping that nobody who's important is like watching this cast, which seems likely.
Can there be some white hat logic there too, where you might get some mileage out of reporting it to someone that could find ways to counter these problems?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I can give an example of that actually. At a company I worked for, we were collecting a load of user data because it was just like the default data to collect in the system, right? And we didn't quite realize exactly how badly it could be exploited until someone was looking at this data and went, oh crap, like this can be used for really creepy stuff. And this was reported to the analytics engineers, who promptly went through and rebuilt the system so that not only did it not collect this data by default, it could not collect this data by default. Like the code was written so that it didn't contain any of these things, all the way from the client code through to like the stuff that pumps it into the database. So yeah, there definitely can be occasions where it's not only like now we know not to pursue that thing, but also like now we know to clean up after ourselves and like make sure this thing is always hashed, or make sure this thing isn't collected at all.
There's a lot of trust there to report that first, though.
Yeah, exactly. Like particularly when it's something, if it's something big and it's an unknown as to how good your boss is, that's where it gets into like up thinking at 2 a.m. territory.
More questions for Oliver? Back
It's
here.
more on like the ethics thing. If a company is doing something actively that you think is questionable, then how would you pursue that? And I guess one option is cut all your ties to it. But then there are people who are using that and using that for that thing.
Yeah. So that's almost not a question specific to ethics. That's a question of like, what do you do when you have a dispute? So have you ever heard of the book Loyalty, Voice, and Exit? So it's an awesome book that I would recommend everyone read. And it's basically about the process when you're in like any environment. It could be corporate, non-corporate, public, private. And you have like a dispute with the organization's direction. So the first stage is loyalty. You say like, well, this is largely a good place to be. Like, I quite like being here. They did this one thing that's a problem, but 99% of the time this is great and it's doing good work and I want to stay. Second stage is voice, which is actively saying this thing is a problem. I think we should not be doing this thing. And then the third stage is exit. When you've reached the point where loyalty isn't enough for you to stay because of like the scale of the thing they're doing, and where everything you say isn't helping, then if you can get out, you do get out. And I can't give advice on like when specifically you quit, or like when specifically you shout at them, or in what situation, because I think that's a very individual and personal judgment of like when you cause a problem that might lead to people patting you on the back and might lead to users being a lot happier, or might get you like fired and turfed out on the corner. That's not there aren't guidelines for like when that's good for people generally. It's an individual thing.
Last question before we wrap up.
None? Cool.
Thank you, Oliver. Okay, folks, that's our first ever data science day. Thanks everyone for coming out. One of the most important things we want to do is get you all interacting with each other, learning from each other. That's why we keep on having meetups every week at our study group. We meet 1 o'clock on Mondays at UBC right now. Check out our website for coordinates, and we will be continuing on doing so throughout the summer. Thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah.